Hey, good morning. It's Friday. We made it through another week. That's an accomplishment and something to congratulate ourselves on, I think. So today's show is on forgiveness. We've had a whole week of kind of looking at, at character issues, I guess, how we're looking at things, how we're feeling about things, what we can do for ourselves to make us feel better. And forgiveness is a topic that is always really valuable to take a look at, both forgiveness for ourselves for things that we've done that we shouldn't have, but also for things that we should have done that we didn't. Both sides of that is important. And one of the interesting things about forgiveness is that a lot of people have trouble with it because they believe that at some level it's letting people off the hook. You know, if you're angry at somebody about something that they've done, you get this idea that if you forgive them, you are uh, saying that what they did is okay. And to be honest, forgiveness really doesn't have to have anything to do with anybody else. It's something internal that you do for yourself. And then certainly, if you want to say to somebody that you forgive them for something, that's fine. But you can also forgive somebody for something more for yourself than for them. And and you don't have to say anything to them if you don't want to. Forgiveness is an inside job. One of the, I'm not sure what culture this came from, but you know, not forgiving someone or looking for revenge. If you head down that path, you, what the saying is that you need to dig two graves, uh, because that's what you're doing to yourself. You're hurting yourself as much as you're hurting them. And like I said yesterday, when I was talking about resentments, was it yesterday? I lose track. Uh, when I was talking about resentments, when we hang on to stuff like that, we are giving that other person our power. We're giving our strength away to them. And not forgiving someone, letting them live in our head, hanging on to anger about them is the same. So I'm going to share a screen here, and we'll start taking a little bit deeper look at this. Okay, forgiveness. This is a Mahatma Gandhi quote. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. And that is really true. And if if we allow ourselves to stay in judgment, if we allow ourselves to stay in anger, we are making ourselves weak, and we're uh, really putting ourselves in that victim mentality where we are letting other people manage and control how we are feeling. I'm going to read you a little story here. Corrie ten Boom, who wrote this, was a woman who in Holland hid German people who the Nazis were after. And she was caught, captured, and imprisoned in a concentration camp for trying to help Jewish people. So this is a story about something that happened to her in 1947 after the war. After the war, she tried to help people recover. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door at the rear. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to a defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. It was a truth that they needed to most hear in that bitter, bombed out land, and I gave them my favorite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from a Hollander's mind, I like to think that that's where forgiven sins were thrown into the sea. God cast them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence. In silence collected their wraps. In silence left the room. And that is when I saw him, working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next, a blue uniform with the skull and crossbones and a visored cap. It came back to me in a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp. That's where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, his hand thrust out. A fine message, Fräulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take that hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner amongst all those thousands of women? But I remembered him, and the leather crop swinging from his belt. I was face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian, and I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things that I did there. But I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fräulein. Again, the hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there. I, whose sins again had to be forgiven and could not forgive. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? I read this multiple times. It always makes me teary. It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, his hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do. For I had to do it, I knew that. The message that we are forgiven has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will you be able to be forgiven. I knew it not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies were also able to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who had nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of will. And the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Help, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. As I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I'd never known God's love so intensely as I did then. The thing that really interests me about that is two things. If she can forgive that, then whatever we're hanging on to that we're struggling with, like me having to go and let this dog in. I'll be right back. Life always goes on. Come on, Chanel. Whatever we're struggling with, if she can forgive that, we can forgive that too. But the other thing I think that's really important in there is that it's an act of will. Like we have to make a decision to do that. We have to make a decision to forgive. So yesterday I had said, make a list. Who are you mad at? I didn't put names on here. I was talking to someone one time and having this discussion with them. And I said, to that person, who are you mad at? And this person said, well, I have a list. And he carried this list with him and pulled it out of his pocket. It had 132 names on it. Like that's carrying a tremendous weight. And we don't have to do that. So, I asked you to make a list. And, I've done this in lots of groups and with lots of people. And the statement I'm going to ask you to consider is always really difficult for people. And what I want you to try and do is to start to tell yourself that person is doing the best job that they can. Whether it's your mom or your partner or an ex or a friend or whatever, they are, and probably were at the time that you got hurt, doing the only thing they knew how to do. They were just doing the best job that they can. And we have to choose. We have to use our will to decide that we're going to let go of that and accept that, that's what's going on, that they were doing the best job they can. And if we do that, our heart softens. And then things become a little bit more manageable and we start to take our power back. We start to regain our power. Now, Wayne Dyer, I've talked a little bit about him a couple of times. He passed away a few years ago, but he was a guy in recovery, but he was also a really strong person who helped lots and lots of people kind of find themselves again. But here's his story about forgiveness. Very old fashioned.
Welcome back.
Got me choked up with that story. My goodness.
Well, your daughter's here today, Serena. She's going to come out later.
She's right there, yeah.
Where are you, Serena? Oh, hi, honey. Good to see you. Yep. It'll be great. It'll be great to hear from her about you being her father. Talk about excuses.
It's so interesting what you were talking about. Your father was watching back there, and you think about other people, that we have something bigger in our lives that we're all connected to. There is a source of some kind that is moving the pieces around, as you said. My own father walked out on our family when I was just a little boy. My mom had 3 little boys by the time she was only 22 years old, all under the age of 4, and he just disappeared and he left. And I grew up hating this man. I mean, I had so much anger toward him, and he married 5 additional women, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver. He was an alcoholic and so on. But it's interesting, many years later, when I kept trying to find him, and I used to be so angry at him, and I'd wake up every morning and I'd be just sweating, and I'd have dreams about him and fighting him and all of this kind of thing. And it was 1974. I found out that he had been dead 10 years, and I didn't even know it. And through a series of the most mysterious kinds of things, I rented a car. I found out that he was buried in Biloxi, Mississippi. The car that I rented didn't have a seatbelt on it, so I reached in and there was a little card inside the seatbelt, and it said Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi. And I was heading down to Biloxi where I was going. I put the card in my pocket and I drove down to Biloxi from Columbus, Mississippi, where I was doing a little bit of work. And I arrived at the outskirts of the city, and I went to find out where my father was buried. There were 3 cemeteries in Biloxi. So I called the first one, there was no answer. I called the second one, that was busy. The third one was this tiny little listing, and I called, and this man came on after a long time, and I said, my father's name was Melvin Lyle Dyer. He died in 1964, 10 years ago. I just wanted to find my father. He went away for the longest time, and he said, yes, he said, your father's buried here. And it was like the end of a dream for me. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, how do I get to the cemetery? And he said, your father isn't really buried in a cemetery. He's buried on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn. And I reached into this cart that was in the rental car that I had rented, wow. And on the back of it there was a map on how to get there. And I went to my father's grave, and I stood there for 3 hours. It was the 24th of August, it was 1964. And what I did in those 3 hours is I was angry at him, I stomped on him, I had other things I wanted to do on his grave. And finally, the last few minutes when I was there, something came over me, and I said, from this moment on, I send you love, and I forgive you for everything that you've done. And when I walked away from there, it was like everything in my life changed. I was overweight at the time, I was drinking at the time, I was in a very bad relationship, my writing wasn't doing the things that I wanted it to do.
Was it the resentment? But what do you think happened in that moment?
Forgiveness, Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And I felt like my whole life totally turned around when I got rid of the anger and the resentment and the hatred. When you carry that stuff around, it's exhausting. Yeah, there's a Chinese proverb that says if you're going to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves, because because it's going to kill you. Yeah, and so my father, the person who walked out on me when I was just an infant and walked out on my mother and forced my mother to put her children into foster homes and so on. He was perhaps the most influential person in my life because it was through the act of forgiveness that my whole career took off. I wrote Erroneous Zones, and 14 days after that, it became a worldwide bestseller, and everything in my life changed. I stopped drinking, I got myself back into shape, I started attracting the right people into my life. Everything changed just through the act of forgiveness. So your father had one impact, and my father, whom I've never even met, had another.
Yeah, I think when we take a moment to take a deep breath, and say there must be a reason. Like there must be a reason for your father to become who he was. Who knows what happened to him?
Yeah. And I still, despite, I say to my mother, I said, have you forgiven him? She said, look, you weren't married to the bastard, I was.
We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
So, what he said there, is so true. When we're hanging on to stuff, it just eats us up. So I'm sure someone chuckled when I had to go let the dog in, but she's already forgiven me for making her wait. She's just lying here at my feet. So says, hi, Coco. Don't you hi, Coco me. You didn't take me to the mall. I'm so very, very angry. Well, I'm a bit ticked. Oh, I love you. No matter how hard I try, I can't stay mad at him. And then this little dog friend says, we dogs are a forgiving bunch. And we can learn so much from dogs. Like they are just unconditional love creatures. And so, think about that. I read a book not too long ago called The Tattooist of Auschwitz. And again, the amazing capacity that humans have to forgive, when we apply it, how hugely beneficial it is to to changing our lives. So here is a little forgiveness meditation. Usually I use Jack Kornfeld's forgiveness meditation, but this is similar, but a little bit shorter. But it's also very good.
Forgiving Yourself by Mind Body Awareness Project. So let's imagine you've got a giant bag, and in this bag is all the stuff you carry with you day after day, year after year. All the times you got angry at somebody, all the times you hated something, held a grudge against somebody, resented something, and held on to it. Feels heavy, huh? Well, imagine we could take some of that stuff out of the bag. Make it a little bit lighter. It's important to note, it doesn't mean that what happened in the past was okay, and it doesn't mean that you have to forget it. What it does mean is that we can free ourselves up from some of the weight that we hold on to, day after day, year after year. And it can help open our heart up a bit more, so that we can be freed up for when new relationships come to us, so that we can be more present for those relationships. So this forgiveness meditation is a simple repetition of phrases that can help jumpstart that process. As you're repeating them, keep connecting to your intention just to let go of some of the baggage you might be carrying around with you. When you hear the bell ring, just bring your attention to it and then wait for more instructions. Okay, take a few deep breaths. Really just feeling the breath go in and out. Focusing just on the sensation of the breath. Just allowing the mind to kind of rest on it a little bit. Now start repeating the following phrases to yourself after I say them. Any way I've harmed someone else through my thoughts, words, or actions, I forgive myself. May I continue to have an open heart. Any way I've harmed someone else through my thoughts, words, or actions, I forgive myself. May I continue to have an open heart. Just keep repeating this silently to yourself just for the next few seconds. Any way I've harmed someone else through my thoughts, words, or actions, I forgive myself. May I continue to have an open heart. Maybe you're noticing thoughts or emotions coming up. That's natural, it's okay. Just keep going back to the phrase and back to the intention. Just trying to let go of some of that baggage. Any way I've harmed someone else through my thoughts, words, or actions, I forgive myself. May I continue to have an open heart. Just repeat it a few more times to yourself. Any way I've harmed myself through thoughts, words, or actions, I forgive myself. May I continue to have an open heart. A couple things before we close. Just remember, this is hard work you're doing here. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, maybe you feel too much emotion starting to come up, it's perfectly fine to take a break. Remember two other things. One, just be kind to yourself. Last thing we need is to put more weight in our backpack. remember, have a little self-compassion, some self-kindness. Second thing is, this is a long process. Took a long time to get all this stuff in that backpack, huh? Maybe even years. So this doesn't always work in one sitting. Just keep coming back to it. This is a process. And remember, you're doing something radical to change your life right now. All right, we're going to finish up. Take a second just to send some gratitude to yourself in this moment. Just the fact that you made it this far in the meditation means you've become a warrior of forgiveness, a warrior of compassion. So let's all take one last deep breath just before the bell rings. When it does, just bring your full attention to it and follow it till it fades out.
Hey, welcome back. So forgiving ourselves is a really good place to start. That's often easier to do than forgiving somebody else, and it helps teach us the process. And I think until we've done that, it's difficult to forgive other people. So spend some time on this, do some work on it, and check your list. And if you start with that thought that those people are doing the best job they can, that will start to soften your feelings around them, and keep asking yourself that question: do I want to give my power away by being angry at somebody? Like keep it inside. Anyway, have a good weekend. I will be back Monday, and we'll see you then.